Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I'm here with Zach, and I know you just told me not to say it, but Duck Ducas. How did you
Ducks.
say it again?
Yeah. You can just say ducks. It's fine.
Ducks. Okay. Um, and Ducks here. Zach's here is going to talk about some character building basics. Got a presentation for us. Um, if you have questions, by default your mics are muted. If you have a question, you can post it in the special events text channel, which is above us. So we'll be kind of watching that as we go. If you have a really long-winded question or something and you want your mic unmuted and ask it that way, you can just ping us and we can unmute your mic. Otherwise, yeah, I think that's it. So Zach, feel free to take it away.
All right. Thank you for the handoff, sir. Good evening, afternoon, or morning, everyone. My name is Zach, also known as DuxDucis, or on Reddit, you may know me as Phi Delta Cuffs. I'm the one who has made a few of the JSON files for the Blood Hunter class that Matt Mercer has homebrewed. And tonight I'm here to help walk you all through building your fifth edition character, both from a mechanical standpoint as well as from a story standpoint, and how all of those interact together. So, where do we begin? I like to approach character building with two main concepts in mind. The first one is what I call the crunch of the character. The second is the fluff of the character. Crunch is covering every single mechanical part of your character. Includes things like your ability scores and their associated modifiers, your race, your class, your proficiencies, everything that is easily tangible and visible on a character sheet and can be used to influence the dice rolls. Fluff is more about the story and the motivation behind your character. Why are they their chosen class? Where in the world are they from? And what interesting stories and tales do they have before their adventuring life begins? Both these parts of your character are going to work together and will often inform choices about the other. You can approach building with either side first, whether you know you want to play a paladin dragonborn or a high elf ranger, or you want to, instead of focus on the fluff side, you want to play a caster with a tragic backstory, or a fighter who's determined to win the grand championship. Both those approaches are equally valid, but for the purposes of tonight, we're going to start with the crunch side of a character. So, the first thing are your six core ability scores. These are the fundamental building blocks of your character and give a hint at their general potential in a certain area. They are the strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores. And their abbreviations are here on screen for you to see as well. Most people will use abbreviations when referring to these scores. A lot of shorthand will use these, so get familiar with what they look like in shorthand. Now, each ability, as I mentioned earlier, has their assigned ability score. They can be improved through leveling up or through a few particular magic items, but the highest they can naturally go is 20, which grants you a +5 bonus, and as low as 0, which grants you a -5 penalty. The sole exception are a few extremely powerful magic artifacts, as well as a few in-game character abilities that let you push the cap beyond 20, but those are very rare cases, and you'll know for sure when they come up. As I was just mentioning, your character's score runs from 0 to 20. A score of 10 is considered the average score, what pretty much anyone can do, and it gives you a 0 modifier, which is the number that actually will impact the dice rolls. Those numbers increase on even numbers ascending up, so 12, 14, 16, 18, 20, and on the odd numbers ascending down, so 9, 7, 5, 3, etc. Your modifier for a particular stat will affect its associated saving throw, as well as every skill that uses that ability as their base, which get into more detail in a moment. The easiest way to remember what your character stats mean are by using the example of a tomato. Strength, for example, is your ability to crush a tomato. Dexterity is the ability to accurately throw a tomato or dodge one thrown at you. Constitution is your ability to eat a rotten tomato and not immediately throw up. Intelligence is knowing that In fact, tomatoes are fruits. Wisdom is knowing that, in spite of them being fruits, they don't go in a fruit salad, regardless of the name. And charisma would be being able to sell that salad even as a fruit salad if it had tomatoes in it. They also have a few other effects in games, such as strength affecting your carrying capacity, dexterity affects your character's armor class, which represents how difficult they are to hit, as well as your initiative roll, so how quickly one can get into combat. Constitution is going to reflect on your character's general health pool, so it's always good to have that at a reasonable amount. And for all you spellcasters out there, Constitution is what you're going to use to maintain concentration on a spell to keep an effect up while you're taking damage or getting otherwise distracted. Intelligence also influences how well you can investigate an area or recall history you've learned from a library. Wisdom affects how well you can pay attention to your surroundings, as well as kind of getting a read on people in the area. It's more akin to street smarts, whereas intelligence could be thought of as book smarts. And then last but not least, charisma will also affect, in addition to all of your social abilities, affect your ability to perform the fine arts, be that music based, like poetry based, play based, anything that might require you to perform will be influenced by your charisma. So, having mentioned all that, where do these stats go on your character sheet? Well, if you look at the top left of your sheet, you'll see I have a little red outline around here. These go in these 6 big blocks. Now, as for how you get your stats, those are going to vary from game to game, but there are 2 very, very popular methods that people use for generating stats. The first is your static stat array. These will use the flat numbers of 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8, and you will place them in whichever order, whichever stat you want to. The second option a lot of people use is letting fate take the reins of your character and having dice determine your stats. The most common way to do this is to roll 4 6-sided die, 4d6, and drop the lowest rolled one. You do this 7 times to get 7 total numbers, and then you drop the lowest of those totals. The remaining 6 are your stats to plug into your ability scores as you desire. Once you have either of those noted down, you'll add the racial bonuses from your character's race, which we'll get into shortly. Add those to whatever numbers you rolled or placed from the array, and whatever those final numbers are your starting ability scores for your character. Now, one thing to note about stats, they can technically be done at any point during character creation, but it is strongly recommended to either begin with this step, that way you know what numbers you're working with throughout the entire process, or end with this step so you have the rest of your saving throws and skills set up, and then all you have to do is plug in the appropriate numbers. So speaking of skills and saves, we're going to delve into that a little bit before we go too much further. The saving throws, these are rolls made to resist a harmful effect or something trying to hurt you. They're frequently associated with avoiding magical or area effect attacks. Your bonus to a particular save will match the modifier of its ability. As you can see up here, we have strength, dex, con. All of these are named after their associated stat, and so you'll use the modifier for that named stat. But every class has proficiency with 2 of those 6, which allows them to add their proficiency bonus to that save in addition to the modifier. So you get a little bit better at resisting certain targeted effects, which again, we'll delve into a little bit more. And last but not least on this side of your character sheet are these skills. This is probably one of the bigger, more intimidating parts of your character sheet. Skills are basic aptitudes every character has. Every character can perform any of these skills listed here. They range from trying to, keep wild animals in check or domestic animals in check to investigating a crime scene or a weird set of ruins to trying to cheat in a game of cards or dice. Each skill has an associated ability score that it's based off of, which is noted in the parentheses next to the skill. So as you can see, athletics based on your strength score, medicine based on your wisdom score, So once again, all these are pulling directly from those ability scores and ability modifiers mentioned earlier. However, what makes every character unique are their proficiencies. These allow them to add the aforementioned proficiency bonus to particular skills, making them more likely to succeed in their efforts. A few characters and races even get expertise, which allows you to add double your proficiency bonus to that particular skill, making them exceedingly good at a few particular things. Now, your skill proficiencies and expertise are determined by your class, your background, and occasionally your race. And this is something we'll go over in a little bit, but it's important to remember that your race and background skills are set, while your class skills are going to typically come from a list. So when you're picking them, it's important to not pick ones that your race or background gave you, so those choices don't go to waste.
Hey Zach, really quick, we have a question in the chat asking if
Uh-huh.
the 6 final roll totals, can you choose where you want those scores to go? They don't go like in the order that you rolled them.
That's correct. You can choose wherever they want to go. Some DMs I have heard like to run fun one shots where you roll those dice and whatever you get, the stats are in that order. But traditionally, you just roll the numbers and then assign them as you want. That's part of the nice flexibility about Dungeons and Dragons is you can literally build whatever your imagination wants. There's no super hard set rules as to you have to do it this particular order. You can assign them as you want. Thank you. Um, so here we have a visual guide to this portion of the character sheet, just kind of a summary of everything. And as you can see highlighted in red, these are where your stats go, your ability scores, if you will. Up here is your proficiency bonus, which I know I didn't touch on too much, but it is a static number. So it starts at +2 for level 1, and it goes up by 1 every 4 levels. So for all intents and purposes, for your character creation, your proficiency will be a +2. Then again, here are your saving throws used to resist harmful effects against you. And here are all of your skills, things you can do to try to further your adventure along. And over here on the right, this is what it looks like at the end of the day. So as you can see, proficiency +2, and looking at example here, I have a dexterity score of 16. So since that is an even number above 10, I'll have a positive modifier, which in this case is a +3. So if you now look here, I have proficiency in the dexterity saving throw. So I get my 3 from dexterity plus the 2 proficiency for a +5 total. And then if you look here at wisdom, it's +1, even though my actual wisdom modifier down here is a -1. And that's again because that proficiency, adding 1 equals it out to 0, and the other one bumps it up to a +1. And going down the list, all of these skills are pulling directly from the modifier of their associated ability and then adding 2 wherever I have the dot filled in. So, with all that crunch out of the way, we now get into some more meat and potatoes of your character with your character's race. Now, your character's race is going to grant you a number of benefits, including your racial stat boosts, as well as a few particular racial abilities. Race can also affect your character's movement speed, how quickly or how slowly they age, what kind of alignment do they lean towards? Are they usually, one for the rules, or do they buck the rules in favor of their own freedom? And what languages do they speak? So if we look at the 3 most popular races, the human, the elf, and the dwarf, we see that up top, humans, versatile as we are in real life, we get a +1 bonus to every stat. We age as we do here on Earth, and we speak common +1 extra language of our choice. If we move down to the elf, their more elegant form grants them +2 to dexterity, and they have an elongated lifespan, living around to 750 years of age, only reaching adulthood at around 100. They speak Common and Elvish, and then they get racial abilities of Dark Vision, which is like being able to see grayscale in the night. Trance, so they only sleep for 4 hours a day. If only we could actually do that. Keen Eyes, which gives them proficiency in the Perception skill, and Fey Ancestry, which helps them resist charm effects. If we then look at their counterpart, the dwarf, the small, hardy craftsman of most traditional realms, they get a +2 constitution because they work in extreme conditions, so they are built with a very substantial fortitude. They live to around 350 years of age, which is quite nice. Unfortunately, their short stature reduces their speed a little bit compared to most other races. They speak Common and Dwarvish, and due to their craftsman lineage, they get some extra tool and weapon proficiencies, as well as the shared ability of dark vision, excuse me, as well as the ability of stone cunning, which helps them identify stonework, and dwarven resilience, which helps them resist poison effects a little bit better because they're always working around, noxious fumes of the furnace, is what I like to imagine it as. And as you can see up top in your traditional 5th edition character sheet, your race goes in the top right amongst this little cluster of information. Now, secondary to a character's race is a character's subrace. These highlight common variations amongst the general population. Not every race is going to have them. For example, humans are just humans. It's not assumed our variations are enough to warrant mechanical difference. However, some races do have these. Take, for example, the earlier aforementioned elf. In most settings, they're going to have 3 sub-races: the high elf, the wood elf, and the dark elf, also known as the drow. High elves are more magically inclined, a little bit more of a haughtier disposition. They think themselves as the most superior of the elves most of the time. They gain an additional point into intelligence. They gain a minor magical spell in the form of a cantrip, and a few extra weapon proficiencies just to show how elfy of an elf they are. Their cousins, the wood elves, are a little more at home in the forest, away from the rest of civilization. As such, they typically have darker hair and olive or copper toned skin, which helps conceal them in their natural wooded environment. They get an additional point to wisdom. They get a little bit of extra movement speed, and they get a special ability where they can hide more often when they're surrounded by natural cover of some kind. And then last but certainly not least are the dark elves or the drow. These are elves that are traditionally portrayed as evil, but again, that is up to your dungeon master to decide their history, and that's up for you to decide if your drow in particular embraces that history or rebukes it. But they've traditionally lived in the Underdark, a area, subterranean realm that is in permanent darkness. And as such, they've evolved to more ebony or ashy skin. Their hair is usually white or gray, and some pupils that are just solid red. They stand out in the crowd very well, but because they do, they get an extra point to their charisma, that persuasive stat. And they traditionally have better dark vision than most other races. That comes at a cost of a sensitivity to sunlight. They don't deal with bright lights very well. So going back to that previous example, if you were to take the high elf as a race in its totality, you would get +2 dexterity from your elf, +1 from being a high, +1 intelligence for a high elf. You would get your magic spell, the cantrip, dark vision as well as perception, a few weapon proficiencies, Fey ancestry, extra language, and any other benefits that both the race and the subrace would confer. Their abilities are always attained together mutually, so it's important to remember your race is going to determine some of your bigger general traits, whereas your subrace is going to give you a few more specialized traits.
Hey Zach, another question here actually.
Mhm.
Let's see. Does or can age influence abilities, like older being wiser but maybe weaker? Can you pick your age, and then could you die of old age in your campaign?
Uh, Theoretically, the last two, picking your age and dying of old age, are in 5th edition. Every race ages and matures at a different speed. As I mentioned earlier, like elves, for example, are not considered adults until they're around 100. So your elven adventurer may be 120 or 130 years old before they consider going out on an adventure now that they've reached adulthood. Whereas you look at something like if your DM allows monstrous races, and you're playing something like a goblin, they have a much shorter lifespan. And so they might go adventuring when they're only, 5 or 6 years old. Um, so that will depend upon your race when they reach adulthood and what their general lifespan is. As for dying of old age, it is possible in a campaign. That being said, traditionally you're going to pick a character that is not close to the end of their natural lifespan, but there are a few extremely powerful spells that can, in fact, age your character rapidly. At which point, again, depending on how long lived your character is, may or may not come to their demise extremely quickly. However, as for age affecting your actual stats, that is not a mechanic built into Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition by default. However, I have heard of some dungeon masters ruling that, depending on age, certain stats make sense. Like you wouldn't expect a 60 or 70-year-old human to have a 20 strength, unless you're playing the 5th edition equivalent of Chuck Norris, in which case, yeah, 20 strength makes a lot of sense. Um, but that is not an actual mechanic built into 5th edition. I do believe there may be one spell that I mentioned earlier which ages you and forces a mechanical change upon you, but I can't recall if that is the case off the top of my head or not. Um, age is entirely up to your choice. And again, thinking about what makes sense for your character in a story perspective, you're not going to have a 13-year-old human going on an adventure unless their life has gone really, really sideways. So that's just a thing to consider. But yes, to answer your question, you can pick your age. Your character probably won't die of old age unless affected by magic, and age doesn't have any direct reflection upon your stats. Good question, thank you. So now that we've gotten all that out of the way, it's time to pick your class. The class is your adventuring job. It gives your character their signature abilities, such as a barbarian's rage, letting them take extra damage and deal extra damage, a rogue's sneak attack, which rewards them for playing tactically and hitting an enemy where they least expect it, or a fighter's action surge, letting them push beyond their normal limits for a brief time to just unleash a flurry of attacks or movements in the middle of combat. There are 13 official classes in total, and each one has a wildly different approach to gameplay. Your class, in addition to determining your abilities, will also determine what stats you should emphasize, how much health you have, what kind of weapons, armors, and tools you're able to use well, what skills and saving throws you get, as well as what kind of equipment it is assumed you begin your adventure with. And once again, class and level go in the top right of your character sheet in this little stat blob. So I'm not going to get into the mechanical breakdown of every single class, but a brief overview for those of you who may not be familiar with them all. First up, we have the Artificer, the newest class, number 13. It's a magical tinkerer that uses their creations to aid their allies both in and out of combat. You're going to focus on intelligence as your casting stat because they are smart little tinkerers, as well as strength or dexterity as a alternative attacking stat should your magic fail you. And they roll with average health. Your barbarian is your melee bruiser who fights with the power of unadulterated rage. You're going to want to focus on strength and constitution because you are right in the enemy's face, wielding a giant weapon with your giant body, and in general, taking most of the hits for the party. As such, they are the only class which gets the 12-sided dice, the D12, to determine their health. So they are the only ones, and they have the highest health potential of any class in the game. Next up is your Bard, a performance-based caster. They primarily focus on supporting spells and abilities to buff your allies and debuff your enemies. You're going to focus on charisma as your spellcasting stat, as your spells come from your performances, and strength or dexterity as a secondary stat should your magic fail you. And they, in line with most of the other characters, run with average HP, which would be a D8, an 8-sided dice, to determine their health. Clerics, heralds of divine power, conduits for their deity of choice. They are the religious zealots of 5th edition. And as such, they have immense and versatile spellcasting abilities. You're going to primarily focus on wisdom as your spellcasting stat, and then strength or constitution, as you will typically be wearing heavier armor and wielding a weapon in melee combat should your deity's power fail you, and you just need to take a hammer to the skull of someone. They also roll with average HP. Next up, we have the druid, who is basically like the akin to the cleric, except they get their abilities from the magic of nature. Whereas a cleric might serve a traditional god in a more conventional pantheon, your druid's going to be serving deities that embrace wildlife and nature as their domains. They also have the unique ability to shape change into more powerful forms than most other spellcasters could try to replicate. Again, wisdom is their primary spellcasting stat, and you will be using strength or dexterity should your magic fail you. And they also roll with average health. Next up, we have the fighter, the adaptable combatant, able to wield any weapon or armor with ease. If you want something dead quickly, a fighter is the one you send for the job. You're going to focus on strength or dexterity, depending on what kind of weapons you want to wield, and constitution, because you're going to be in the fray, taking most of the hits. And as such, you do get slightly better health than most others with a d10 to determine your health pool. Next up, we have the monk, who is an agile skirmisher, darting in and out of combat. They're great for hit and run tactics, spreading the damage out over a lot of enemies very quickly. You're going to primarily focus on dexterity as your attacking stat because you are punching people to death, and wisdom because that's what determines how powerful your key abilities are, which is like the monk's version of magic. And monks roll with average health. Paladins, holy warriors who are bound by their sacred oath to themselves and a deity should they so choose. You're going to be focusing on strength or dexterity as your attacking stat, again, based on what weapons you want to use. And charisma is your spell casting stat because your magical abilities come not only from, possibly a deity, but most of it comes from the oath you pledge to yourself that you have made to keep. And that's what helps give you your magic abilities. And because they are typically frontliners, they also get above average health. Now, this is a lot, and I appreciate y'all's patience. We are almost done with the classes. Ranger, if you wanted to play a magical Bear Grylls, this is the one for you. They are a wilderness expert, bolstered by magic of the woods, very much akin to what a druid has. You're once again going to focus on strength or dexterity, depending on your weapons, and wisdom for your spellcasting. And they are one of the other classes that get slightly above average health, as their role as a forward scout traditionally leads them to finding the traps or monsters first. Next up, we have the Rogue, everyone's favorite rapscallion, the master of stealth, subterfuge, and in and out of combat utility. They are the sneaky ones that if you ever need to break into anything or get anything done, you want a Rogue in your party. You're primarily going to focus on dexterity as your main stat for both combat as well as most of your utility abilities, and intelligence or wisdom, depending on if you want to be a more investigative rogue or a more perceptive rogue, because those two are in fact different. And rogues roll with average health. Next up, we have the sorcerer. Unlike wizards who have to study magic or clerics or druids who have to pray for magic, sorcerers just are magic. They were born with it. And because of that, they're able to manipulate magic in ways no other caster can match. So you're going to probably focus on charisma as your spell casting because, again, you yourself are the source of magic. And dexterity or constitution as a secondary stat because sorcerers are one of two classes that only get a d6 little cube guy to determine how much health you have. So they are pretty squishy and do not want to get hit. Next to last, we have the Warlock, who's obtained their magic through a pact with an otherworldly deity. Think of if Aladdin had asked Genie, you know what, I want magic abilities. And Genie was like, okay, but here are your extra terms and conditions. That's what a Warlock is. And they are probably one of the most customizable classes. So you can make them extreme damage dealers. You can make them be really good at social interaction. If you want to play a unique spellcaster that has a lot of flexibility, Warlock's the one for you. You're going to primarily focus on charisma as your spell casting, since your spells come from a negotiation. You essentially have to negotiate every time you want to use a spell. And then strength or dexterity is a good secondary stat, depending on what you want to use. If you happen to make your patron mad and you don't have access to your magic for a little bit. And they roll with average health. And then last, but certainly not least, is our wizard, the book nerd of 5th edition who studies magic, but don't insult him because he'll drop a fireball on you. They are the most versatile caster in the entire game. They primarily focus on intelligence, as all bookworms do, and dexterity because they do not want to get hit, as they are the other class that has the d6, the lowest dice, to determine their health. So here we have a little further breakdown of the wizard. Again, intelligence, primary spellcasting stat. Your health is the 1d6 plus your constitution modifier. For your proficiencies, you have very minimal weapon proficiencies, as you can see here. Wizards aren't traditionally known to beat things up with the staff unless your name is Gandalf, so they don't get a whole lot of weapons. As far as their skills, they get to pick 2 from this particular list here, most of them focusing on intelligence as their base stat. Their saving throws are intelligence and wisdom, reflecting how sharp their mind is and how well they can resist effects of other spellcasters. And for starting gear, they get a quarterstaff or dagger. Again, they're not. If you're using a weapon as a wizard, something has gone horribly wrong. They also get a component pouch or arcane focus, which they'll use for their spellcasting. They get a particular gear pack focused on either their scholarly pursuits or their exploratory pursuits, as well as their signature spellbook. Sam, do we have any questions in the chat, or am I good to keep on going?
You're all good.
Excellent. So now that we've got the biggest choices out of the way, we're starting to move more into the fluff territory of your character with the background. Backgrounds provide some mechanical as well as story-based perks to help flesh out your character. From a mechanical standpoint, they give you 2 extra skill proficiencies, which your background would give you. Some extra starting equipment, some extra starting gold, as well as a feature that isn't a necessarily direct mechanical improvement, but does provide some guidance for how the world would treat your character given their background. And then on the more fluff side of things, backgrounds also include suggested characteristics for flaws, bonds, ideals, strong personality traits, all manner of things to help, again, flesh out that character. So, and is in this step, as I mentioned earlier, where you want to finalize and double check your skill proficiencies. After noting down the ones given to you by your background and your race, if it does give you one, you'll then select skills determined by this class. Now, I say this because while your background and your race skills are permanent, your class skills, as I mentioned earlier, are pulled from a list. So if your race or background gives you those skills, it effectively takes them off the list because you don't need to select them because you already have them. And so you don't want those choices go to waste, because picking a skill twice doesn't give you expertise with it. You have to specifically be given expertise itself, not double up on a skill to get expertise. So, and again, background noted up here in your little stat block that include your class, race, etc., etc. So looking at an example for a background, we have the Acolyte. So follow a certain religion. They spent most of their life devoted to a deity and traveling around in the name of that deity. So as such, they get insight in religion, since they deal with people a lot, spreading their faith. Insight helps you read people and figure out their motives, and religion helps you remember religion. They've also acquired 2 languages, as they've been traveling around quite a bit or had many people come into their temple. As such, they've slowly over time picked up how to speak another language. As far as gear, they get everything appropriate to their religion, a holy symbol, prayer book or wheel, vestments. They also get some extra incense for rituals of any kind, set of extra common clothes, and 15 gold pieces because being a clergyman pays. And last but not least, their feature, Shelter of the Faithful, allows you to perform religious rites associated with your ceremony, associated with your deity, be that a coming of age ceremony, funeral rites, blessings on a new business, deities run the gamut of services. So if you do happen to pick the Acolyte background, do your research on whatever deity you are an Acolyte of, because that'll open up a fun role-playing opportunity for your Dungeon Master to call upon you to perform a service. In addition to being able to perform services, your temples and temples friendly to your deity will offer you extra refuge and a few other benefits as well. So again, while not a direct mechanical impact you might feel on a day-to-day basis, helps establish that relationship with the world at large and helps build some of that character's history. So step 5, we're almost done with this part, I promise, guys. I appreciate y'all's patience, is selecting your starting gear. So each class offers you a set of gear including armor, weapons, spellcasting items, and equipment packs. If you happen to see 2 options listed for a particular choice, such as 2 short swords or 2 simple weapons, you'll pick one or the other because you can't have you walking around with like 8 swords. Not everyone can be Geralt. Same rules go for equipment packs, as pretty much every class offers you a choice between the 2 of them. You'll also add any extra items from your background into your inventory. And as you can see here, this is where your equipment would go. So most of your miscellaneous gear is listed here. There's also a second page of everyone's character sheet that traditionally is where you put stuff that is in your backpack. This equipment piece is mostly for things that will become relevant on a day-to-day basis. And over here is where you keep all of your gold pieces: copper, silver, electrum, gold, and platinum. Electrum's not really used, but an easy way to remember how much of each coinage is worth is its multiplicities of 10 going up. So like 10 copper, worth 1 silver. 10 silver, worth 1 electrum, if your campaign uses it. If not, 10 silver is worth 1 gold, and 10 gold is worth 1 platinum. Just add, subtract zeros as necessary. There's one other thing I need to touch on, your armor. So as I previously mentioned, every class except the wizard starts out with armor of some kind. They're traditionally divided into light, medium, heavy, as well as shields. Now, light armor is good for your very dexterous characters because they allow you to add your dexterity bonus with no limit whatsoever. So if you look at, for example, studded leather gives you a base armor class of 12 and then lets you add your dexterity. So if your character happens to have a +5 to their dexterity, your armor class is going to equal 17, which is as good as the second best heavy armor you can get. Medium armor allows you to add a dexterity bonus of up to +2. These are good if your character is slightly dexterous, but maybe doesn't want to be impeded by how big heavy armor is. Medium is a nice middle ground. And then heavy armor is your traditional. You think of a paladin or someone wearing a set of full plate mail, chain mail, whatever. Heavy armor is where it's at. And these do not allow you to add your dexterity bonus to it. And most of them, all these that I have underlined, also impose disadvantage. So rolling 2d20 and taking the lower one of those on all your dexterity checks because you're walking around with a bunch of metal. It's going to be pretty easy to hear you. And up top here is where you notate your armor class. Now, traditional character sheets don't have it, but I highly recommend having an aside if you have a shield. That way you know when it's equipped because it bumps your armor class by 2, and when it's not equipped because then you'll have to drop your armor class by 1. And do we have any questions in the chat, Sam?
I don't think so. Let me double check one more time. Nope, no questions so far.
All right. So just to give everyone a visual example of how this looks, we're going to look at Magik McCaster. He is a high elf wizard who was always interested in magic, could do magic from a young age, and decided to take up the life of a wizard. So if we use our standard array here, 15, 14, etc., this gives us our starting values here, 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and 8. Now, knowing that being a high elf gives us +2 dexterity, +1 intelligence, and knowing that we need to hit even numbers to increase our actual bonuses, we can put that 15 intelligence, or we can give the 15 to intelligence and then the +1 from our race will bump it up to 16. And then knowing we have a straight +2 dexterity, we can give it to any of the even numbers to go ahead and bump it up again as well. So if you look over here, you'll notice my dexterity, I gave that, I put a 12 in there, which +2 put it to 14. So my dexterity bonus went from a +1 to a +2. And then my intelligence went from a 15, granting me a +2 bonus. It got that 1 point from my racial, which bumped it up to 16, and now a +3 bonus. And now the scores are set, we can determine the skill proficiencies. So it's again Sage background that I picked, gives us Arcana and History. So I'll go ahead and fill those in, as you can see I've done, which adds the +2 bonus to my +3 intelligence that Arcana and History are based off of. Being an elf gives me Perception. So once again, fill that in, add the +2 to the Wisdom for a +4 total. And then Wizard gets to pick from Arcana, History, and a few others. Since the background has already given me those two, excuse me, we can ignore them, and so that narrows our class list down. And since I know we're a little smarter than we are wiser, I'm going to go with Investigation and Medicine, since both of those are keyed off Investigation is keyed off Intelligence, and Medicine is keyed off the Wisdom stat. So one last thing to touch on is what about the fluff side of the character? Should you play optimally or should you focus on crunch? So as I just demonstrated in that example, each race and subrace with their own bonuses is going to favor particular classes. For example, this High Elf Wizard I just made, they have an extra cantrip and their intelligence boost helped put my spellcasting stat above average. If I were to play something like a half-orc barbarian, half-orcs get extra strength and constitution, plus the ability to deal extra damage, to resist getting knocked out sometimes, things that naturally a barbarian would want to have. So these characters make a lot of sense from a crunch perspective, but if you want to play something different, go for it. While a dwarven rogue or a heavily armored elven fighter may not be the quote-unquote optimal route, if they're what you want to play, then feel free to do it. The only limiter to your fun or your character should be your imagination. So this is a very brief, concise, short and condensed version of it. The overall building method. So first foremost, create your stats. Technically you've done it in time, but we're going to go with first for this case, using the array or dice roll methods. Step 2, choosing your race and subrace, noting their ability score boost as well as any racial abilities you get. Step 3, picking your class, making sure you notate what saves you get, what skills you get, what gear, weapons, armor, different things like that you get to use, as well as what your starting health is going to be. Then you choose your background, noting down the feature and what extra gear you get, and then finalizing your skill proficiencies, ensuring there's no overlap between your background race and your class. Last thing is choose all of your appropriate starting equipment, finalize everything, and your character is ready to go off on their 5th edition adventure. Now, a few things to consider for the future. Every time you level up, you're going to get several benefits, including more health, additional class and subclass abilities, as well as the ability to multi-class and gain more stats or a feat. Now, I will say for those of you who are just interested in the bare bones building of characters, I've covered that in pretty much its totality. What we're about to get into is stuff a little more advanced. So if anyone has any other plans, I will not keep you here. I respect your time. But if any of you have any other questions, feel free to go ahead and send them into the chat. I'm just going to take a quick pause to see if anyone has any questions. And then we're going to delve into the more advanced side of character building with leveling up and some more fluff. Sam, do we have anything?
Let's see here. I didn't think we had any new questions, although a couple people are typing right now. So we'll see what comes through there. And then also, if you're on the Twitch side watching this, unfortunately, I do need to take the stream down because I got to jump over to one of our newbie session games. So if you're on the Twitch side and you want to keep listening into the next section, you will need to join the Discord server and jump into the special events voice channel. And then, yeah, let's see here. let's see. While we're waiting for them to type in there, yeah, I guess. Yeah. So Twitch viewers, like I said, jump over, and then Zach, I'm just going to quick say thanks before I jump off myself. Thanks for doing the presentation.
Of course.
Very
Thanks for
interesting.
having me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if anyone wants to rewatch this later, one other thing, a copy of this from Twitch will end up on YouTube, where you can go check it out if there's something you want to re-listen to or whatever. And then if you're ever looking for links, or maybe the link to the presentation or something like that as well, it'll be in the video description. And then Zach, feel free to share any links you want, in the Discord channels and stuff.
Absolutely.
Cool. And then one other note too before I jump off, we do have another special event coming up. I believe it's next week Wednesday, or not next week Wednesday, next week Sunday. So like a little over a week from now. So feel free to keep an eye out for that. Tune into that as well. And then Twitch viewers, last chance. I'm taking down the stream in a second here.